Everyone avoided the black woman at the wedding, whispering, staring, pretending she didn't exist. But then the groom called her name. And in that single moment, everything changed. No one expected the truth. She wasn't just a guest. She was his billionaire boss at work. What happened next would shock the entire room and leave everyone speechless. Before we dive in, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let me know your city or country. I love seeing how far our story travels and connecting with each of you. It truly means so much. Amara Sinclair, 28, stepped out of the sleek black SUV and onto the marble courtyard of the sprawling New Jersey estate. The wedding had been billed as exclusive, and the crowd of well-dressed guests parted like water, only to glance her over with hesitation, then quickly look away. Whispers slithered through the air like tiny vipers. Who invited her? She doesn't belong here. Her heels clicked sharply against the stone, echoing her own heartbeat. The designer dress she wore felt heavier than silk, more like armor. Amara had been to countless events where her presence had been judged, diminished, overlooked, but this felt sharper, crueler. It wasn't just indifference, it was thinly veiled disgust. She took a deep breath, trying to center herself. You're here. You're meant to be here. You earned this. But even as she reminded herself of the promotions she'd fought for, the late nights in the office, the contracts she'd won for her firm, the stares made her stomach twist. A man in a navy tux whispered something to his wife, and they both turned away quickly. Another group of women huddled together, laughing quietly, but their eyes flicked to her, calculating and judgmental. Amara forced a small, polite smile, nodding to a few guests, but the polite nods were met with awkward avoidance. The energy was thick, suffocating, almost tangible. Why does everyone feel the need to exclude me? She thought, frustration rising like a storm tide. Then, just as she was about to step toward the grand staircase, the murmuring stopped. A deep, firm voice cut through the air like a blade. Amara Sinclair. Every head turned. Conversations froze. The bride and groom's entourage stiffened. Even the string quartet faltered mid-note. Amara froze, her pulse jumping. She had expected murmurs, stares, maybe whispered insults, but not this. Not a public summons in front of everyone. She looked toward the source of the voice. There, standing near the gold-trimmed arch where vows would soon be exchanged, was the groom. Tall, confident, impeccably dressed. His hand pointed at her, eyes unwavering, voice carrying authority. The crowd parted instinctively, almost as if expecting a scandal to unfold. Confusion mixed with disbelief in her chest. The whispers rose again, but this time with tension, curiosity, and shock. Guests leaned forward, craning their necks. Some mouths opened, then closed, unsure what to say. Amara's mind raced. Why is he calling me? Did I do something wrong? Her palms tingled, the weight of judgment pressing down harder than her heels on the marble. Then she realized something even stranger. There was recognition in his gaze. Not just recognition, but respect, awe, something that unsettled the very core of the room. Every eye in the courtyard was on her now. The judgment, the whispers, the avoidance, all paused. All eyes were waiting for her to move, to answer, to step into the unknown. And in that moment, Amara knew, whatever happened next would change everything. If that shocked you as much as it shocked me, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and share this story with your friends. You won't want to miss what happens next. It's only getting more intense from here. The sun hadn't yet fully risen over Manhattan, but Amara Sinclair was already at her desk in the glossy 45th floor office, the city sprawling beneath her like a river of lights. She adjusted the crisp white blouse under her tailored blazer and took a slow breath. Today was critical. Her team's presentation could make or break a $12 million merger for the firm. Every detail had to be perfect. Her fingers flew over the keyboard, spreadsheets and projections reflected in her wide, focused eyes. The hum of office chatter buzzed around her, punctuated by the clack of heels and murmur of phone calls. Some colleagues offered brief smiles or nods. Others barely looked up. Amara had learned early that politeness in her world often masked judgment. A few whispered comments about her accent, her style, her ambition being too loud floated across the room. Microaggressions she had trained herself to ignore, but they still gnawed at her, invisible yet sharp. Amara, don't forget the Q3 projections. We need them tight, her assistant, A young man named Lucas said quietly, placing a fresh coffee beside her. Already done. Double-checked every number, she replied, forcing calm into her voice, though her stomach coiled with tension. This wasn't just about numbers. It was about proving she belonged in a world that often tried to erase her. The office doors swung open, and her main competitor, Derek Holden, sauntered by with his usual smirk. Derek had a way of making every small accomplishment feel suspect. "You really think your deck is ready for the board?" he said, feigning casual curiosity, eyes darting at the screen. "Hope the boss likes surprises." Amara met his gaze evenly. "Surprises aren't part of my plan," she said smoothly. But inside, her heart thudded faster. She knew Derek liked to undermine people quietly, planting seeds of doubt, sowing chaos like it was a game. Turning back to her screen, she tried to focus, but her concentration shattered when she overheard Derek's low, sharp voice speaking to another colleague. "Vanessa, make sure she doesn't get the client's final approval. Let's tweak a few numbers subtly. She won't see it coming," he whispered, smirking. Amara's eyes widened, the blood rushing to her face. Her pulse hammered. They were plotting to sabotage her project, the one she'd poured months of sweat, late nights, and personal sacrifice into. She leaned back slightly in her chair, hands gripping the edge of the desk. How long have they been planning this? Who else knows? Her mind raced, thoughts colliding in rapid succession. She could confront them, but that might expose her in ways she wasn't ready for. She could go to the boss, but Derek had ways of twisting perception. She needed a plan, but the weight of the betrayal pressed down like a storm cloud. And just as she sat there, frozen and calculating, she realized the quiet office around her felt suddenly hostile, every whisper, every glance carrying hidden agendas. Amara swallowed hard, determination flaring in her chest. "They can try, but I won't let them win. Not today. Not ever." But before she could decide her next move, she caught Derek glancing her way again, a sly, knowing smirk tugging at his lips. And in that moment, she realized, whatever happened next would test everything she had worked for, and the board presentation might not be the only battlefield today. The conference room was brighter than Amara had expected, the long polished table gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. She had rehearsed every word, every slide, every statistic for this presentation, and yet the instant the projector flickered on, she felt the subtle shift in the room. Eyes that had been polite now darted with barely concealed doubt. Amara clicked through the slides with confidence, voice steady, heart pounding in time with the ticking clock on the wall. Then, halfway through the Q3 projections, she noticed the numbers on the spreadsheet weren't matching her carefully verified calculations. Her stomach dropped. Her throat went dry. Derek sat at the end of the table, smirking just slightly, his hand barely moving as if he'd orchestrated this chaos with invisible strings. Vanessa sat beside him, avoiding her gaze but suppressing a smile. The numbers had been subtly altered, a sabotage so quiet that it seemed almost like a technical glitch, but in front of the board, the result was catastrophic. What happened here? Amara's voice trembled, a crack in her usual composure. She felt the weight of 50 eyes turning on her, the sharpest judgment she had ever felt. Her team shuffled uneasily, unwilling or afraid to defend her. Every whisper, every sidelong glance, seemed to underline her failure. The lead board member's brow furrowed. "Amara, these projections don't make sense. Are you confident in your numbers?" Her hands clenched into fists beneath the table. Rage boiled up like molten fire, but it had to be controlled, buried deep. "They tried to humiliate me. They tried to destroy me." Her pulse thundered as she swallowed hard, forcing her face into calm neutrality. "I'll double-check the figures and follow up immediately," she said, her voice cold, sharp, almost cutting through the tension like glass. The room nodded politely, but she could feel the isolation crushing her. No one spoke up for her. No one offered support. The humiliation burned hotter than any flame she'd felt in her professional life. She walked out of the room, each step heavy, the eyes of coworkers trailing her like invisible knives. Back at her desk, Amara sank into her chair, jaw tight, fists resting on the polished wood. She replayed every moment, every subtle smile, every whispered comment from Derek and Vanessa. Her mind raced with strategies, with ways to expose them without losing herself in anger. Then, her inbox pinged. She glanced at the subject line and froze. Private meeting. CEO request, Amara Sinclair. Her fingers hovered over the mouse, heart skipping a beat. She hadn't expected recognition, much less an invitation from the top executive herself. Her mind buzzed. Was it a reward? A warning? Or a lifeline? Amara's thoughts swirled. Could this be the opportunity she needed to turn the tables? Or was it another test, another trap? The uncertainty gnawed at her, but something deeper stirred. A spark of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, she was not as powerless as the betrayal had made her feel. With a sharp inhale, she clicked the email. The words on the screen made her eyes widen. The CEO wanted to see her today, immediately, in her private office. And in that moment, Amara knew this meeting would change everything, or destroy her completely. Amara stepped into the CEO's office, the doors closing behind her with a soft click that felt heavier than steel. The room was sleek and minimalist, sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, painting gold streaks across the dark wood floors. At the far end of the room sat Evelyn Mercer, the firm's formidable yet respected CEO. Tall, poised, with silver-streaked hair pulled into a sharp bun, she radiated authority, but there was warmth in her eyes that immediately put Amara at ease. "Amara," Evelyn said, her voice calm but commanding. "I've been hearing a lot about you." She gestured to a chair. "Sit. Tell me what happened in that meeting." Amara hesitated, then recounted the sabotage carefully, describing the altered numbers, the judgmental stares, and the humiliation she had endured. Evelyn listened intently, fingers steepled, eyes never leaving her face. When Amara finished, Evelyn leaned back, exhaling slowly. "You handled it with professionalism," she said. "Most people would have snapped, cried, or quit. But you—" She paused, a small smile tugging at her lips. "You stayed calm. That says more about your character than any spreadsheet ever could." Amara's shoulders sagged slightly, relief washing over her like a tide. It felt almost unbelievable that someone of Evelyn's stature could see her struggle, truly see her. For the first time in weeks, hope flickered in her chest. "You're ambitious," Evelyn continued, rising from her chair and walking over to the window. "I see it in every project you take on. But ambition alone won't protect you from people who want to undermine you." She turned, eyes locking with Amara's. "You need guidance, strategy, allies, and more importantly, confidence in your own power." Amara nodded, words caught in her throat. It was as if Evelyn had read every insecurity she had spent years hiding. "I want to help you navigate this," Evelyn said, sitting back down. "But I won't hold your hand forever. You'll need to step up, make bold moves, and trust yourself." Amara felt a surge of inspiration, a mixture of awe and determination. She had worked hard, sacrificed nights and weekends, and yet, she had rarely had someone of influence champion her like this. Evelyn's gaze softened, almost maternal now. "There's an opportunity coming, one that could change your career, your life, even how people perceive you. But it's not for everyone. It will test your strength, your ethics, and your patience. And it will require more than skill. It will require courage." Amara leaned forward, heart hammering. "What kind of opportunity?" Evelyn smiled knowingly, leaning back in her chair. "I can't give you the details yet, but I can tell you this. It's the kind of chance that doesn't come twice. It's the moment where you prove not just what you can do, but who you are. And when it arrives, you'll need to be ready to step into it fully, without hesitation." Amara swallowed, the weight of the words settling on her shoulders like a mantle. She felt fear, yes, but excitement too, a spark she hadn't felt in months. And as she left the office, her mind racing with possibilities, she knew one thing. Her life was about to change. But she had no idea just how drastically, and how soon. Amara's journey is just getting started. If you're feeling inspired by her determination, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this story. And tell me in the comments, what would you do if you were in her shoes? The drive from Manhattan to Maryland was quiet, the hum of the car engine the only sound accompanying Amara's thoughts. The rolling hills and quiet streets of her hometown felt like a distant world compared to the steel and glass jungle of New York City. Each familiar sign, each curve in the road reminded her of summers spent running barefoot through the yard, of laughter echoing off brick walls, of simpler times before the world had taught her to measure herself by others' approval. By the time she pulled into the driveway of her childhood home, her chest ached with a mix of nostalgia and longing. The small, red brick house looked the same, down to the chipped paint on the front steps. The scent of jasmine in the garden reminded her of mornings spent reading under the old oak tree. Her mother, Lydia Sinclair, appeared at the door, arms open. She was smaller than Amara remembered, but her presence was immense, a quiet strength that had shaped the woman Amara had become. "Amara," Lydia said, pulling her into a hug that smelled of lavender and home. "You're here. You've been working too hard." Amara let herself melt into the embrace, the tension from the past week, the sabotage, the whispers, the judgment, falling away, if only for a moment. "I needed to see you, Mom. I needed a reminder of who I am." They sat together in the cozy kitchen, the sun spilling over the counter where Lydia had set out freshly baked cookies. Amara told her mother about the wedding, the looks, the whispers, the subtle hostility that seemed to cling to her wherever she went. Lydia listened, her expression a mix of concern and understanding. "You've always known the world isn't fair," she said softly. "Even when you're at your best, there will be people who see only what you look like, not who you are." Amara nodded, a lump forming in her throat. She had faced microaggressions all her life, but it never felt less painful. "It's exhausting. Sometimes I wonder if it's worth it." Her mother reached across the table, gripping her hand. "It is worth it, because your life, your achievements, they show everyone else what they're missing. But listen to me, Amara. When you step into these wealthy, privileged circles, you'll need more than skill and brains. You'll need patience, courage, and the ability to read the room. Some people will try to belittle you. Others will try to test you. You must stand tall always." Amara's mind raced with her mother's words, the echo of caution threading through them. It was advice she had heard before, but never felt as urgent, as alive. "I will, Mom," she said quietly, determination rising in her chest. "I won't let them break me." Lydia's eyes softened but carried a weight. "Just remember, it's not only about winning the battle. You have to protect yourself while fighting it. Trust wisely, and never assume kindness from those who wear their smiles like masks." Amara absorbed the warning, the truth of it sinking deep into her bones. The stakes were higher than she had imagined, and every move mattered. As she left the kitchen to pack up and return to her life in New York, she felt a mix of love, resolve, and a flicker of fear. Her mother's words had reminded her that the world was not as simple as merit and hard work. The battle ahead would test more than her skills. It would test her character, her patience, and her strength. And in that moment, Amara knew the path she was about to walk would demand everything she had, and more. Amara arrived in Miami just as the sun was climbing over Biscayne Bay, painting the skyline in gold and coral. The city felt alive, vibrant, and a little dangerous, much like the deal she was about to close. She stepped into the glass-walled conference room of Solara Capital, the client's headquarters, and felt the familiar surge of anticipation mixed with anxiety. The meeting began smoothly enough. Amara presented her firm's proposal with precision, every slide rehearsed, every number verified. Her voice was steady, confident, resonating with authority that few in the room could ignore. Yet, beneath the surface, subtle undercurrents of prejudice skimmed the air like invisible waves. One client, a sharp-suited man named Richard Callahan, barely met her gaze. "Interesting approach," he said, his tone flat, almost dismissive. "Are you sure your team can handle the scale of this project?" The implication was clear, skepticism, thinly veiled, tied to her presence. Amara's pulse quickened, but she held her composure. "Absolutely. We've executed similar deals exceeding $20 million, with successful outcomes," she said, leaning forward slightly, letting confidence cut through the tension. Another client, a woman with perfectly styled hair, nodded politely but kept her arms crossed, a barrier that spoke louder than words. Every subtle smirk, every sidelong glance, every pause. This is their test, Amara thought. Her stomach nodded, but determination flared. She would not let their assumptions define her performance. Hours passed as she navigated questions, objections, and what felt like an unending barrage of doubt. Sweat prickled at her temples, but she refused to let it show. Her voice never wavered, her logic never faltered, yet the weight of proving herself against invisible biases pressed down relentlessly. By the time the meeting seemed to be concluding, Amara allowed herself a small breath of relief. She had handled it, at least for now. The deal looked strong, almost too strong to fail. Almost. As she packed her briefcase, preparing to leave, her assistant, Lucas, slid a discreet note across the table. She unfolded it carefully. The message was brief, but it cut through her relief like ice. Be careful. Meridian Corporation is moving aggressively against your deal. They may try to undercut or sabotage the agreement. Amara's heart thudded painfully. Meridian Corporation was a rival company known for ruthless tactics, and this was no idle threat. They would stop at nothing to seize the contract for themselves. She glanced around the room, noting the friendly smiles of some clients that now felt fragile, performative. A cold knot of dread tightened in her chest. This was bigger than I thought. This isn't just about proving myself, it's about survival. Her fingers gripped the edge of the glass table as her mind raced, calculating, planning. She had faced prejudice, whispers, sabotage, and betrayal. But this was different. This was a threat that could undo months of work in a single move. Amara took a deep breath, letting the Miami sunlight fall on her face. She would not falter. She couldn't. The stakes were too high, and she had too much riding on this. But even as her determination solidified, a shadow loomed. A rival company ready to strike, ready to destroy everything she had fought for. And she knew, deep down, the next move could change everything. The tension in the Miami boardroom was palpable as Amara sat across from the clients, her laptop open, her fingers tapping lightly against the edge of the table. Meridian Corporation had tried every trick, delaying meetings, questioning her numbers, planting doubt. But Amara had anticipated it. She had stayed up late the night before, double-checking, triple-checking, and crafting a presentation that left no room for misinterpretation. When she began, her voice was calm but sharp, each word precise, each slide a weapon of logic and clarity. Our projections are based on verified market analytics and real-time data, she said, pointing to the chart illustrating ROI growth. Any adjustments may have been stress-tested under multiple scenarios. Our team guarantees delivery, on time and under budget. A murmur rippled across the room. The clients, who had been hesitant before, leaned forward. Amara's eyes locked with Richard Callahan, who now looked slightly unsettled. She pressed on, layering context, showing case studies, and highlighting her team's past successes. Each piece fit together like a puzzle, leaving no doubt who was in control. By the end of the presentation, the room buzzed, not with skepticism, but with approval. The deal was hers. The clients shook hands, expressing excitement and relief, their earlier doubts erased. Amara exhaled slowly, the tension leaving her body in a rush of exhilaration. Pride swelled, and a faint smile tugged at her lips. Lucas leaned over, whispering, "You did it, Amara. You really did it." She nodded, trying to keep her composure, but the satisfaction was sweet. All the late nights, all the subtle prejudice, all the sabotage attempts, it had paid off. For a moment, she allowed herself to revel in triumph. Yet, even as she collected her things, she felt the familiar prick of envy. Some peers in the office had been watching remotely, their congratulations lukewarm, their smiles tight. She knew their minds were already spinning, plotting their next move, resentful of her success. Before she could savor her victory for long, the news hit like a lightning strike. Meridian Corporation's CEO, Bradley Kane, had scheduled a press event to announce a competitive analysis of her deal. Cameras, reporters, and microphones waited outside, eager for a soundbite. Amara stepped into the foyer, her pulse tightening. She hadn't expected him to make it personal. And yet, when Bradley Kane strode onto the stage, the room hushed, and he began speaking. It quickly became clear he had something else in mind. While some people celebrate their first wins, Kane said, voice smooth, a venomous edge hidden beneath a smile, others stumble spectacularly when the real stakes appear. It's fascinating to see confidence outpace competence, sometimes disastrously so. A murmur ran through the press pool. Cameras flashed, reporters leaned forward, hungry for more. Amara's jaw tightened, heat rising to her face. The public insults stung sharply, undermining the victory she had just earned. And yet, beneath the anger and embarrassment, something sparked, something that refused to break. She would respond, in her own way, on her own terms. Because Amara Sinclair didn't just survive. She adapted, planned, and struck back. And she would have her chance very soon. The Miami Gala glittered with chandeliers and polished marble floors, the kind of event where wealth and influence rubbed elbows like old friends. Amara adjusted the straps of her dress, feeling slightly out of place despite the designer label. She had come for business, to solidify partnerships and ensure her deals stayed untouchable, but she couldn't ignore the flutter of nerves that accompanied the buzz of the room. Her assistant, Lucas, nudged her toward the center of the crowd. "You're being expected in the main hall. And someone wants to meet you," he said, a knowing smile tugging at his lips. Curiosity pricked at her. Amara moved forward, weaving through clusters of executives, each handshake measured, each smile calculated. Then she saw him. Ethan Calloway, impeccably dressed, tall, with an aura that made the room seem smaller around him. He exuded charm, the kind that drew attention without effort, and yet there was a subtle intensity in his gaze that made her chest tighten. "Amara Sinclair," a voice said, smooth and confident. She turned, startled, and found herself facing him fully. He extended a hand politely. "I've heard quite a bit about you. Your work is impressive." Her heart skipped. The words were simple, but the tone carried something more. Curiosity, admiration, perhaps recognition. She shook his hand firmly, trying to keep her composure. "Thank you, Mr. Calloway. I appreciate that." He smiled faintly, and for a moment, the noise of the gala faded. Their eyes locked, and Amara felt a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. Intrigue, tension, and yes, a subtle spark of attraction she hadn't expected. She forced herself to glance away, redirecting her attention to the crowd, trying to remind herself that this was still a professional setting. Yet Ethan didn't let the moment pass. "I hope you know," he said, voice lower now, almost conspiratorial, "that not everything here is as it seems. People put on masks, Amara, and sometimes the ones smiling the brightest are the ones you should watch the most closely." Amara blinked, taken aback. The remark was cryptic, unsettling, but somehow deliberate. Her pulse quickened. Was it a warning? A tease? Or something more personal? Something she wasn't meant to understand yet? She opened her mouth to respond, but a sudden swirl of laughter and applause from the main stage pulled their attention back. Ethan stepped aside, giving her a polite nod before melting into the crowd. Amara's mind churned as she sipped her water, heart racing. His words lingered like an echo she couldn't shake. Masks. Watch closely. Who did he mean? Was he warning her? Or testing her? For the rest of the night, she caught glimpses of him from across the room, each time his presence a mix of challenge and curiosity. And every time, the cryptic remark replayed in her mind, twisting uneasily with her own growing awareness. Something about this man, about this night, felt like the start of something bigger than a business encounter. By the time she left the gala, the Miami sky was deep indigo, stars twinkling faintly over the water. Amara's thoughts were tangled, anticipation and unease coiling together. She knew one thing for certain. Ethan Calloway wasn't just another businessman. And whatever lay ahead, his cryptic words were a sign. She wasn't ready yet, but soon, she would have to face exactly what he meant. The invitation arrived on a crisp cream envelope, embossed in gold lettering, delivered by a courier whose expression barely masked curiosity. Amara held it in her hands, heart pounding. She had not expected an invitation, especially not to a wedding that promised to be as lavish as this one. Her fingers lingered over the envelope, reading and rereading the elegant script. Ethan Calloway, and who? She knew she wasn't meant to be part of their world. She had spent years proving herself in boardrooms and conference halls. Yet here, in a world of privilege and inherited wealth, she felt like a guest in someone else's life. And yet, the envelope wasn't addressed to Ms. Sinclair in the formal way. It felt deliberate, personal, almost a test. The closer she got to the wedding date, the more her anxiety mounted. Every outfit she considered felt either too flashy or too plain. Every word she rehearsed in her mind for introductions seemed hollow. What would people think of her? How would she navigate a room of strangers whose judgment would pierce her like needles even before she spoke? Amara tried to push the fear aside. She had faced subtle bias, sabotage, and professional rivalry. This would be no different. Yet, something about stepping into a world that so often dismissed her made her pulse quicken with a mixture of dread and adrenaline. On the morning of the wedding, she arrived at the estate, a sprawling mansion nestled in New Jersey's quiet countryside. The valet greeted her politely, yet she could sense the instant calculations behind their eyes. Who is she? Why is she here? The whispers began even before she reached the grand entrance, faint but unmistakable, like a current beneath the surface. As Amara stepped into the foyer, the air shifted. Guests, dressed in silk and designer labels, glanced toward her, paused, then turned away. Subtle maneuvers, sidesteps, quick retreats, conversations paused mid-laugh. It was as if the room itself conspired to make her feel invisible, unwelcome. A cluster of women in pastel gowns exchanged looks, eyes narrowing, lips pressing together. A man in a crisp tuxedo muttered something under his breath, shaking his head subtly. Amara felt their judgment like a weight pressing down on her shoulders. She squared them silently with her gaze, but the effect was small. The whispers persisted, curling through the air like smoke. Her heart thumped, a mixture of frustration and unease. Why is this so important to them? She thought. I'm just here to attend, nothing more. Yet the subtle fear of judgment gnawed at her. Every step felt deliberate, measured, as if one misstep could undo her presence entirely. Then, near the grand staircase, she caught movement out of the corner of her eye. A group of guests whispering rapidly, positioning themselves to avoid her path entirely. They were preparing, almost theatrically, to erase her from the room. Amara froze, her stomach twisting. The whispers, the avoidance, the silent maneuvering, it was all clear now. They are readying themselves to ignore me, to pretend I don't exist. Her pulse quickened, a mix of anger, fear, and anticipation coursing through her. She took a deep breath, straightened her posture, and stepped forward, knowing the moment of reckoning, the moment that could change everything, was about to arrive. The grand doors of the ballroom swung open, and Amara stepped inside, feeling the polished marble floor under her heels like a minefield. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above, reflecting light in 1,000 dazzling fragments, yet none of it softened the cold weight of the room's scrutiny. The music softened as heads turned, but it wasn't curiosity, it was judgment. Guests shifted in their seats, whispering under their breaths. Some glanced at her directly, then quickly averted their eyes. A woman in a champagne gown clutched her clutch a little tighter, leaning closer to her companion, speaking in hushed tones that carried far enough to sting. Who invited her? Is she supposed to be here? Amara's stomach twisted. She forced a polite smile, nodded at a few people, but the gestures went unnoticed, unreciprocated. Each whisper felt like a needle, each sidelong glance a strike. The humiliation was sharp and immediate, unlike the subtle professional snubs she had endured in office corridors. This was personal, public, undeniable. She made her way toward the center of the room, holding her head high, but every step felt like wading through molasses. Conversations faltered when she passed, the murmur of voices dropping into awkward silence. Even the waitstaff seemed to pause, unsure of where she should stand or if she belonged at all. Amara's cheeks burned. She tried to remind herself of her accomplishments, the victories that had carried her through sabotage and doubt, but in this room, surrounded by wealth and privilege, those successes felt distant and invisible. She felt the weight of every assumption, every prejudice pressed against her shoulders. She caught a glance from a group near the grand staircase, whispers quickening, hands gesturing subtly for each other to move aside, to leave her path clear. The realization hit her like ice water. They were avoiding her. They were erasing her existence. The intent wasn't hidden anymore. It was deliberate, orchestrated, humiliating. Her fingers tightened around her clutch, nails digging into the leather as she struggled to keep her composure. A lump formed in her throat, but she refused to let tears betray her. She had survived office politics, sabotage, whispered insults, but this felt raw, intimate, and painfully public. Then, just as she adjusted her stance near the center of the ballroom, a voice rang out. A deep, clear, commanding voice that cut through the murmurs like a knife. Amara Sinclair. The room froze. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Every head turned. The whispers ceased abruptly, replaced by a tense, anticipatory silence. Amara's heart leapt into her throat. The gaze she met across the room belonged to the groom, tall, confident, and unflinching. His eyes locked onto hers, unwavering, as if the rest of the world had vanished. The guests collectively inhaled, sensing the gravity of the moment, the shift in power that neither Amara nor they had anticipated. Her pulse thundered, stomach twisting in disbelief. "Why is he calling me?" she thought, the question laced with fear, confusion, and a flicker of hope. The chandeliers glittered, the music paused, and every eye in the room rested on her, waiting for what would happen next. And in that instant, Amara knew everything was about to change. If Amara's courage and determination inspired you today, hit that like button and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below and tell me, where are you watching from? I want to know all the incredible places our viewers are joining from. Don't forget to subscribe for more shocking, emotional stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat.